This is clear politics. Hello, Lithuania, once a proud industrial region of the Union, now it's still a region of a Union, but a different one. But now Europe has become a symbol of gloom and bankruptcy. TVs, fertilizers, nuclear energy, and even their own cars, all have been derailed. Now it's a green paradise where 80% of industry has gone down the drain for the EU. So Lithuania's only real exports left are its workforce and nostalgia. How did it come to this? A requiem for the factories and the future of the Baltic Republic. We provide only the facts. It's up to you to draw conclusions. Lithuania became a member of the European Union on May 1, 2004. Politicians rejoiced, and what they had dreamed of for years finally happened. The application to join the EU had been submitted almost 10 years earlier.
A few years before Lithuania joined the EU, many Baltic and international experts painted the most optimistic pictures of what awaited locals under Brussels' wing. Economic growth, higher GDP, general prosperity, and a European standard of living, these were just some of the promises. But the miracle never happened, and European prosperity never came to Lithuania. This country remains one of the poorest in the EU, ranking at the bottom of almost every economic and social development list, notes Balt News.
European integration turned into a disaster, with entire sectors of the economy shut down. Yes, Europe regularly allocates money to Vilnius from its funds, but it's only enough to partially cover the losses, the scale of which we'll show next. The pride of the Lithuanian SSR, a 2-unit nuclear power plant with the largest reactor at 1.5 gigawatts. Ignalina, launched in the 1980s, powered all of the Baltics and supplied energy to neighboring socialist countries.
The plant was a real gift for Vilnius, and a lucky one at that. Originally, the nuclear plant was supposed to be built on the Belarusian shore of Lake Drisviati. But after studying the soil, it became clear it was better to build it on the Lithuanian side of the river.
In 1987, they even planned to build a third unit. But then perestroika intervened. Lithuanian nationalists sabotaged the construction and told the Russians to get out. In 91, Vilnius gained full control over Ignalina.
In 1991, the Lithuanian Republic got Ignalina nuclear power plant under its jurisdiction. Thus, it became the 31st country in the world to use nuclear energy for its economy. It's easy to understand what this facility meant for the country by looking at the numbers. In 1993, a record year for Lithuanian nuclear energy, Ignalina produced 12.26 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity. That was 88.1% of all electricity produced in the country that year. No wonder this figure made it into the Guinness Book of Records.
It was part of the European Union's plan to reduce the energy independence of Eastern European countries. While this may have been done to make Lithuania more dependent on energy imports from Scandinavia, as we see now. After disconnecting from Brel, we became completely dependent on Scandinavia because there is no unified European power grid. We have a connection through Poland, but it's very small. It's not meant for us to get electricity from Poland, but rather for Poland to get electricity from us and Lithuania.
5,000 employees provided energy to the Baltics, Belarus, even the European part of Russia. Moreover, official Vilnius even had plans to build a second nuclear plant, Visaginas. But then there was a knock at the door. For the European Union in the early 21st century, Ignalina became a thorn in the economic side. On February 19, 2001, the Lithuanian government decided to shut down the first unit of Ignalina NPP.
It was Lithuania's entry into the EU that completed the deindustrialization of the Baltics. Brussels forced the closure of Ignalina NPP, which at the time was the largest in the region. After that, Lithuania and its neighbors became energy deficient.
The EU promised money for the plant's closure, but the words were more generous than the deeds. They gave just under 2 billion euros for Ignalina's decommissioning, but 8 billion were needed. The plant was closed without solving the nuclear waste storage issue.
Who needs a seller with cheap electricity on the market? Don't forget, cheap electricity would have allowed other enterprises to produce cheaper goods, which they could have freely sold on the European market. By selling their cheaper products, they could have competed with the European giants. So naturally, this was a political move.
The results of Ignalina's agony, a loss of 70% of domestic electricity, electricity prices up fourfold, and losses of 5 billion euros.
Reckless policy reduced the competitiveness of an already struggling economy, which for years relied on Western subsidies. Last year, the Ministry of Economy and Innovation officially acknowledged the obvious.
Due to the sharp rise in electricity prices, Lithuania's manufacturing lost its competitive edge in the EU, the Ministry of Economy and Innovation said. According to the head of the State Policy and Data Analysis Group at the ministry, Titas Budreika, industrial electricity costs in Lithuania are now about a third higher than in the rest of the EU, and loans are also more expensive. He also said Lithuanian companies take out loans at an average of 22% higher rates than firms in other Eurozone countries, further reducing Lithuania's competitiveness.
Another Lithuanian pride, the Alytus textile factory, was built in the late 60s, the largest and best light industry enterprise in the Western USSR.
The plant supplied clothing and materials for the entire Soviet bloc. At its peak, it employed over 4,000 people. Everything went downhill after 1991. The company was bought and privatized by Tolar AM Group from Singapore.
The sharks of capitalism couldn't or wouldn't modernize Elitys. Workers weren't paid and bankruptcy loomed.
The Lithuanian government intervened, nationalizing Elitys and investing several million euros. But even that didn't help. The company racked up debts twice the amount of state investment. Then it was sold to private entrepreneurs, but they couldn't save Elitys either. In 2007, the factory was declared bankrupt. When workers found out, they even took the general director Algida Zhukavichina hostage. People demanded 3 months' unpaid wages and were outraged that management was selling off the plant's equipment for scrap.
The conflict was smoothed over by paying compensation with European money, the same money that had left them jobless. But the flagship of light industry was gone. By the mid-2000s, Elitys ceased to exist. The workshops were demolished and people sent packing. Panevėžys was considered one of Lithuania's industrial centers. Its flagship was Ekranas, the largest picture tube factory in Europe. After the USSR collapsed, it tried to keep going, but by the mid-2000s, it too was history. Multi-million losses hit in 2005, production stopped and bankruptcy proceedings began in 2006. The final death came in 2007.
The Panevėžys picture tube plant, Ekranas, considered one of Lithuania's most successful companies just 3 to 4 years ago, is being auctioned off, reports the Lithuanian site Penki. According to the bankruptcy administrator Gintaras Sagičius, the creditors committee recently set the sale price at 300 million litas, 85.7 million euros.
A couple of months later, that's exactly what happened. The land was sold for next to nothing, the market given to Western brands, and the remaining equipment shipped to China. Lithuanian authorities couldn't think of anything better than to demolish the abandoned workshops.
From the Business Baltics newspaper, 13/6/2006, on July 5th, 3,667 people will be laid off from the Ekranas picture tube plant in Panevėžys. The company, whose management last year talked about conquering the EU market with technical innovations, couldn't compete with cheaper Asian products and went bankrupt. Ekranas's bankruptcy is a serious blow to Lithuania's social sphere.
In total, almost 5,000 people lost their jobs at Ekranas and its subsidiaries. Imagine the shock for a city with no other electronics industry, Panevėžys. Today it has the highest unemployment in Lithuania, up to 30%.
What wasn't destroyed in Lithuania in the 90s was actively destroyed after joining the EU in 2004. That's the difference between Lithuania and Latvia or Estonia. There, the industrial base was destroyed in the 90s for domestic political reasons. Lithuania had no clear reason to destroy its real industry or economic sector. So by the time it joined the EU, it still had a serious industry, agriculture, and transport sector. But under Brussels' deliberate efforts, all of that was destroyed.
In Soviet times, Lithuania was called the showcase of socialism. It even had its own Silicon Valley, a center for producing various equipment, with its jewel being the Alpha electrical engineering plant.
The Alpha plant in Vilnius recruited the best specialists from the Union, who developed and produced household and military electric motors, as well as record players and the well-known Spalis, Dyna, Alpha, and Gintaras tape recorders. In Soviet times, Alpha led in electric motor production. After the USSR collapsed, bankruptcy. Now the site houses a bar, concert hall, and companies making pumps and fans.
Add to that the Vilnius electrical measuring equipment plant and many others.
In Lithuania, entire industries were built from scratch in the post-war years. For example, machine tool, electrical, mechanical engineering, instrument making, oil refining, and pharmaceuticals. Giant enterprises like Žalgiris, Alpha, and Pergale appeared. By 1950, local factories and plants were producing 2.3 times more than before the war. The Western ship repair plant, built in the 1970s, was one of the largest in Europe. In late Soviet times, the fishing fleet had 257 vessels.
Fishing couldn't survive European freedom either. Quotas and restrictions in the Baltic Sea, plus cheap European imports. Market reforms sent a once successful industry to scrap, a successful sector.
Lithuania's fishing fleet, inherited from the Lithuanian SSR, was destroyed. At one time, it was the largest fishing fleet in Europe. The fleet of just the Lithuanian SSR, not the whole Soviet Union, just Soviet Lithuania, was the largest in all of Europe. It far surpassed the fleets of Greece, Sweden, East and West Germany, and other maritime European countries. After joining the EU, its destruction, which had already begun, became reversible.
The Lithuanian government is still working hard to finish off its industry today. Sanctions were imposed on Belarus. And now the nation's pride, Klaipėda port, is barely hanging on. In 2023, its throughput fell by almost a third.
The reasons for this massive failure are well known both in Lithuania and abroad. Experts unanimously agree that the drop in cargo flow is mainly due to the halt of Russian transit and Belarusian potash fertilizer shipments. Back in prosperous times, Belarusian shipments alone accounted for nearly a quarter of all cargo handled. And to that, you have to add oil and petroleum products, which Belarusians also use to export through Klaipėda.
Just a second. The Klaipėda port makes up about 10% of Lithuania's GDP and provides 58,000 jobs. And that's not all.
In April 2022, due to sanctions pressure, Lithuania's own phosphate fertilizer plant, Lifosa, shut down. Production stopped because of expensive gas and because one of the owners is a Russian citizen.
It's surprising since 98% of the plant's output was exported to the UK, Spain, Poland, France, Belgium, and even Ukraine. Then things got ridiculous. The plant restarted and shut down several times. The losses are strictly classified.
These EU sanctions against Russia and Belarus were like a shot not in the foot, but in the lungs, suffocating not just the EU economy, but Lithuania's as well. And Prime Minister Ingrida Šimonytė, meeting with Lifosa's union leaders, Eurochems, said the government wants to keep the plant running, but stressed they won't allow any sanctions violations.
Throughout the 1990s, nationalists in power tore apart Lithuania's economy, but the most striking blow came signed by their Euro friends.
Among the conditions for Vilnius joining the EU were bans on state support for businesses, removal of all customs barriers, no restrictions on selling goods from European countries, and finally, Western investors. As a result, only very small businesses mostly survived. The European integration project can be called a failure, since in 30 years of independence, Vilnius lost most of its transit, much of its population, and nearly destroyed its own economy.
So why does industry now make up less than 20% of Lithuania's GDP, when in 1991 it was 42%? Where is the huge Lithuanian fishing fleet of over 500 vessels? Why is the Ignalina nuclear power plant closed? Why does Lithuania lead the EU in population decline? In the early 1990s, the country had 3.7 million people. Now it's 2.8 million. And the first highway in the USSR, from Klaipėda to Kaunas, is also a legacy of the occupation. Sadly, today in Vilnius, they love to talk about a sleeping nation and fight the dead, tearing down Red Army monuments. But they really don't like to remember who rebuilt and transformed Lithuania after World War II, and at whose expense.
When there's nowhere to work and nothing to live on, people flee the country's economic chaos. Mass depopulation is another sovereign achievement of Vilnius. Since Lithuania left the USSR, the country has lost almost 1 million people. more than half of them left after Lithuania joined the EU in 2004. By 2050, the population is expected to drop to 2 million. Today, it's almost 3.
With the current political leadership and their policies, at some point they won't be able to maintain the whole social infrastructure. Pensions, benefits, keeping the economy running, the labor shortage will only get worse. In a system where ultraliberalism is imposed on a testing ground, along with deep-rooted Baltic xenophobia and fear of anything foreign, that's why they oppress the Russian population, based on these attitudes. Nothing will change in this model. And the political leadership is the carrier of this model. So as long as the likes of Nausėda, Rinkevičius, and their chaos shape Baltic reality, nothing will change. They'll keep fading away and leaving.
In January 2021, human rights activist Donatas Šulcas gave a very emotional interview about Lithuania's dire situation.
All power was seized according to a US globalist scenario, and today those who fired blanks at the Vilnius TV tower shouldn't be on trial. It's those who came to power in 1991, who changed election laws to let party clans seize power, who ordered fire on peaceful demonstrators, who deliberately violated Lithuania's constitution to join the EU and NATO, who destroyed the national currency, the litas, and bankrupted Lithuanian banks.
The Baltic Republic has become a dependent country living off EU subsidies. In return, Lithuania actively supports its role as an anti-Russian platform, and still can't grasp that for the West, it's just a tool, not a partner. That's especially clear amid the ruins of its industry. Goodbye.